The best way to understand Greece is to compare it with like California or New York or Illinois or a state over here that's having issues, because they're in the same relative position where, unlike the central government, they actually have to get the euros into their checking account before they write checks, or their checks are going to bounce. So they have to tax or borrow in order to be able to spend, just like California does. I'll just use California for in comparison. And the difference, one of the differences is the European Monetary Union, the central bank, is not allowed to bail out Greece, whatever that would mean, whereas the U.S. Congress and the Fed is certainly allowed to bail out California if they want to. And so Greece, at least legally and under the treaty, doesn't have a safety net like the U.S. states do. The EU is like if you had the United States and you had the Federal Reserve, but you didn't have the Treasury and you didn't have a Congress that was spending money. Now they've got the European Parliament, which does a little bit, but its role is extremely limited. And so it's pretty much like it doesn't exist. And it's certainly not involved in any of these matters. And just like the Federal Reserve on its own can't bail out California, that would have to come through Congress. Well, in Europe, there is no Congress that would do this. Now, you could get the finance ministers together and they could change the treaty, but that's a pretty big deal. Okay, the other thing is, if you look at Greece's debt ratio, which I checked this week, but well over 100% of GDP, and you look at California at about 5%, and California's in trouble at 5%. How does Greece get all the way up to 120% before they're in trouble? And what are the differences here? Okay, so it's if something does happen, and it's starting to happen in the Eurozone, then it could be a catastrophic failure because their debt ratios are just far higher than they would have been allowed to get, let's say, under normal circumstances. And that was to have the European Central Bank just offer a per capita payment of, let's say, €1 trillion to all the member nations. Now, when they do it on a percent, it's not a bailout. You're not helping any one nation. You're giving each one of them their percent. So if one of them had 10% of the population, they would get €100 billion. So it would be based entirely on population. What they'd have to do is propose it to the finance ministers, who would then agree to accept it or reject it. And I can't imagine them rejecting it because they all need the money right now. And it wouldn't affect spending over there because they have their Maastricht Treaty limit spending. And so giving them the money wouldn't mean they're going to run out and spend. So it wouldn't cause inflation. It wouldn't change anything like that. But it would reduce their debt ratios. And so they could, if this distribution were, let's say, 5% of GDP, they could reduce everybody's debt ratio by 5% of GDP and just calm the credit fears and calm the funding fears and be able to move on and be able to do it again as needed. And once they've established that as a pattern, then the credit go away. Now, they would still, as I said, have their constraints on spending. And so it wouldn't be inflationary and it wouldn't cause it to change the value of the euro or anything like that. It would just ease credit concerns. But that suggestion hasn't gotten anywhere as far as I know.